Hi everyone, welcome back, and we are back talking about feedback. So feel free to follow along with the slides as we go through some of the content. A lot of the info from today comes from the work of John Hattie, researcher out of the University of Melbourne, who has done the largest body of educational research ever done. 500 million students, 500 million students, not just looking at individual studies or meta-analysis of those studies in a bigger group, but the synthesis of multiple meta-analyses. So it's a huge scope of work. There are some issues with some of his work, but by and large the output has been really useful for teachers and gives us a lot of really useful info to be able to benefit our kids. And in real terms, AITSL, the Australian body, found that quality feedback can benefit students in up to 8 months of extra progress. So that's really positive. The framework we'll go through today will be pretty recognizable and intuitive probably, but having a framework will help us to give the best feedback that we can and really helpful for targeting the feedback that we give to our kids. And you can check the feedback booklet attached for some excerpts from research and some extra examples as well. So we'll start with affirm, correct and direct, point out the process, and finally coach, going from beginner to more advanced student. So affirm, which is feedback on the positives, and the main point for this level is that it is not praise. How often do we say well done or great job as the first thing to our students? But there are a couple of issues with this. First off, there's no learning information, and so what can often happen according to the research is that students will hear the praise and then disregard the rest. So they found that feedback without praise is 4 times as effective as feedback with praise. Praise focuses on the student and not their strategy, so it can promote a fixed mindset instead of a growth mindset. And they start to view their achievement as part of a fixed ability rather than the result of effort and strategies and tactics, something that can be practiced and improved. So this is called ego-involving feedback, and it actually has a negative effect on the feedback that we give, 0 or negative. For example, something like, you're one of the best writers in the class. Students given that sort of praise do less well than students given no feedback at all. So better to give no feedback than to give praise that involves the ego and attaches self-esteem to achievement instead of strategy and effort. So the alternative is affirm instead of praise, and it answers the question, what do I want them to keep doing? And it attributes success to strategy and effort, not to inbuilt ability and innate ability. It makes sure they keep doing the right things as well, because obviously we don't just want them to improve, but there's positives that we want them to keep doing. And it's important so that we balance the feedback and don't overwhelm them with a ton of improvements. So some examples. It's easy to start with you and then verb, because that can give them something really actionable, and it's specific to a strategy or a tactic and not just innate ability. So you read slowly and carefully, you checked back on your work. These are just simple verb sentences that lets the kid know exactly what they did right. A verbal feedback given stamp is a helpful strategy that I found. You can buy these, they're not very expensive. And as you conference with a student and you stamp their work, after you've given the verbal feedback, you can just say, make a quick note of that, and they would list down all the positives in their work that you've just said. So the example at the bottom of this slide only has an improvement, but obviously you could make it an affirmation as well. So in a typed comment, something brief like this focuses on a specific behavior or strategy, and you can see how each affirmation starts with a verb or something specific that the kid has done. Moving on to correct and direct, feedback on their improvements. And this is maybe the most natural one for us as teachers. We tell a student what to do differently, and it's closely tied to the learning goal and the outcome, what we're directing them towards. Of course, it's much easier and more effective to use correct and direct when you're targeting a specific success criteria or learning goal, and we'll talk more about that in our next session on success criteria. But there are some examples in your booklet, and a little bit more here. So correct and direct asks what should they have done? So not just what they did well with the affirm level, but what should they have done? It's based on the success criteria, and that's when it's most powerful. So kids know what they're aiming for. And we'll focus on success criteria next. It's also most effective when it's given while students are still practicing. So they have time to put your feedback into practice and not as a post-mortem afterwards of what they should have done when it's too late to action it, but they can really apply it and make the most of it in the middle of their work, while they still have time to change their approach or strategy. So some examples start with you needed to also and another verb, which really makes sure that we're honing in on a specific strategy or behavior we want them to implement. So for example, use the same operation on numerator and denominator and start your paragraph with a topic sentence. And again, something really simple, the verbal feedback stamp with an affirmation and an improvement. Just one thing that the kid has done that you want them to keep doing and one improvement you want them to make, while they make a quick note of that on their work. And as with all of these levels, feedback can be formal and written or informal and in the moment. It doesn't cost us any extra time to do this when we're already roaming around the classroom. And something like a simple success criteria checklist, so they know exactly what they did right and what they need to do better next time. And this is a comment generated by one of the feedback tools that we'll look at in the later sessions, where you tick a few boxes and it generates a comment for each student instantly. And you'll notice that each improvement starts with a verb of something specific. So moving on now to point out the process, which is feedback on their strategy as we start to get into some of the deeper levels for more advanced students. So it's treating the underlying condition, not just the symptoms of what we see there, but something that's happening in the student's thinking process too. So there's a bit of overlap with the correct and direct previous level, but this has a slightly different focus. So it's a deeper version of what should they have done. So it goes beyond a specific topic or a specific question to their underlying thinking, and it suggests a general strategy that's applicable to multiple areas, not just what you're working on right then. So in this example, maybe pause the video here and see if you can figure out what the misconception is that the student has. So you might have noticed that this student has a misconception of subtracting the smaller number from the bigger number when they should be subtracting the bottom number from the top number. So that would be the correct and direct feedback for that specific topic at that time. They may be also unsure about borrowing, so it could be an opportunity to reteach that as well. But the generalized strategy for point out the process could be something transferable to other topics where they write down specific strategies for each algorithm that they do in maths so that it's transferable between topics. So point out the process in summary names a transferable strategy, something like trying to estimate before calculating, that's applicable to multiple topics, using a checklist of steps, or circling the clues in the text. So all of these are more general, but deal with some of the maybe underlying approaches that the student has. So here's another example for one of the feedback tools that we'll look at in the later sessions. So you can see there's some affirmations in there, but no praise, because we don't want ineffective feedback that damages the student. But you can see the improvement there is a little bit of correct and direct, but the pointing out the process is the general strategy of reading over the paragraph, checking for different options, not just assuming that the first option is the best one. And lastly, going on to coach, feedback on their self-monitoring. So this is where the students who are advanced and already have a grasp of the concept and the material in the topic helps them to give a bit of feedback to themselves so they become more self-directed. So coaching questions are open-ended and reflective, and they're not for when you're first learning a concept, because the content and the material in the topic is enough for the students to be grappling with instead of dealing with reflection that they may not have the actual nuts and bolts to deal with. And it encourages this internal feedback and independence, so students become less dependent on us, which is always the goal. And it's useful for when a student is getting a lot of the right answers and can use some extension. It challenges them to self-reflect and find their own improvements as well and become more independent. So obviously it depends on how motivated the student is, but this can be a good way of helping them to detach a bit from us as teachers. So the main thing with coaching is asking what questions should they ask themselves. Just a quick example, is this your best work? What isn't the best about it? Asking them to analyze it themselves. And what's the first thing you can do about that? So these general questions could work for a whole range of students. And another example from the feedback tool. So affirmations as before with no praise, but it asks a question of them at the end. How could you check that your quote supports your fact? So this one is for a student who would have a better grasp of the content, which you could then conference with them about later, checking for the strategies that they themselves might come up with. And sometimes this level is less applicable to written feedback, but the tool that we'll look at also lets you personalize higher level feedback. So that is a quick run through of the feedback framework and its different levels. That could be a good model for us. So when we get together on Wednesday in person, bring some of your students' current work or an assessment to give feedback on together. So we'll make it a really practical, useful time. And have a think about what makes feedback high quality or poor as well, because we'll discuss and we'll summarize some of the stuff from this content. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you soon. Bye.